1 year ago I bought this white human-powered white horse, and I won't say it changed my life completely, but I started to train a lot more, participate in the races and enjoy riding in general significantly, as well as started to do the races internationally, travel in the Europe and create bike maintenance videos. Well, you can see this on the channel. I already have a video after 3000 kilometers, what was my general insights and notices about the bike. The reasons why I'm doing this is because it's kind of becoming a lifestyle once you start doing it. So 7000 kilometers plus in a year on full suspension bike. I'm broken down the bike into pieces, not because I didn't have what to do, but because there is something to do with the bike. And at the same time, I decided to create this video where I will cover pain points which I noticed throughout that duration. So if that's interesting to you, that's it. Let's jump ahead. We'll begin from the front of the bike, where a lot of you have refused to use sit. I had kind of similar feeling about this fork as well, but apparently after the full service has been done and the damper has changed, the issues were completely disappeared. Initially, the main problems was with the damper, that it didn't hold lockout fully, and you tighten everything, bleeding is done, and it still didn't lock firmly. The damper was changed by warranty, the issue was completely disappeared. Well, at an extent where you have to take a look from time to time how it behaves. For example, you are riding on a climb, you are completely on full lockout, and notice that it moves a bit. Then you have a time, just release the lockout, release the pressure to the handlebars and just spin that barrel. You will be surprised how tiny movement can save your race or ride. However, this is specifically when the damper is not broken. The bladder starts to bleed, and that way you don't have enough compression here. So keep that in mind. Moving ahead, actually not ahead, but a bit upwards, is the headset. I will cover a few things here. First, you have to be extra precautious when tightening the headset, simply because you can damage your hoses or the shields, and then something will work not efficiently. Here, for example, after quite a lot of traveling and redoing the same thing with the headset from time to time, I squeezed this shocks shield, and that way the cable is getting stuck there. For that reason, I'm going to replace this just to make sure that everything is smooth. Other thing about the cables as well, you know that once you put down this nicely, neatly looking Fraser handlebars, you want to make sure that the cables are hidden underneath and it's clean and it's all that stuff. However, make sure not to cut them too short. Reason being why you should be aware of this is simply because even though the cables are neatly underneath and they are long enough to connect to all those levers and all that stuff, if you are traveling and you want to remove a handlebar, you need to have some extra room in order to put the handlebars on the side. Unless you want to remove the levers like I do on the walk back, it's not very efficient. For that reason, when replacing cables, I make sure to leave a bit extra room for them. Even a few centimeters would be enough, simply because you don't want them to be too tight. At the same time, you will have that extra room. Also, it will save you a bit of a sanity when you're doing maintenance, if you're doing it yourself, or if you're bringing it to the bike shop, you will save sanity of your mechanics, simply because if they are short, the handlebars hangs here and it's not comfy to work putting the handlebars on the fork and all that stuff. Keep that in mind. By the way, this is original, I guess, 7 centimeters 9 angle Fraser handlebars. I replaced them to -20 simply because they were too close to me, so I extended it a bit and also move it down. Because when these were original on the bike, I was too arched in order to use those. So if you want to, maybe I can sell it to you if you ask nicely. Like with everything, all the pieces which are thin and tiny and very lightweight tend to break down. The same happened to me with this one. So basically it's just a cable guide which goes into your bearing, and you can see that it broken down. I haven't ordered the replacement for this, so I'm going to fit it into like this, just carefully adding it into the bike. But this has happened because there was a lot of tension when removing the cables. Imagine that everything is pressing to the sides, those are very tiny, and when we are pushing that down, it just causes a lot of stress. For that reason, it has happened. And I also know that this is quite common issue, especially if you push them without taking care, so take care of those. As you probably already understood, in this video I'm going to talk more and do things, but at the same time I will maybe showcase something as well. And one of those things are headset cups. When you buy the bike, you got the full package. One set comes installed to the bike, usually it's the one which can change the angle, and the other is 0 degrees. I find it funny when I ask someone what type of angle do they use, and they say to me, well, it was like I got it from the shop, so the way it was originally. Well, actually, if you don't know how they are fitted in your bike, you don't even know how in the shop they set up it to be. As with everything, in-depth topics requires a bit more explanation, and I will do the video about it as well. But you can see that there are some notches. So here is the cut. And it is as well on the other part. On those which are negative, there are no cuts at all, so they are straight. Also, if you are not aware, on this part it is written what angle this part is. Keep in mind that if you have M-frame size, for example, and you want to give your friend the XL bike the same cups, it won't work because they are different sized, so keep that in mind. In order to change the angle of the headset, these should point out in different directions. If we put one at the top and it points back, that way you need to put the bottom that it would point straight. Keep that in mind, because if you're doing some maintenance, sometimes your fork just drops down, this one slides off. If uncarefully, you just spin it around to make sure that those two pieces goes into the frame, you can easily misalign them and make your geometry of the bike incorrect. I will create an in-depth video about these with all the measures so you would get a better idea. But in general, what those cups does is that they change the angle of the fork. It's not very well visible, but if you want a slacker version, your fork would go in front, and if you want a steeper version, your front would go more straight down. If you imagine the angle here between the ground and the fork, this one, then slacker version is increasing, the angle is decreasing, and then version is more steep, the angle is increasing. It's a very simple and straightforward thing. And the reason why I spent quite a lot of time talking about those cups and the fork and all that stuff is simply because everyone's talking about, well, it's kind of two bikes in the same, blah blah blah, but not everyone knows how to change it, and they just have something which we don't use. You can find the whole process in separate video, and that's why I haven't mentioned the angles, because honestly I forgot them myself. So we will have to see it in the full video, and I will remember myself as well. And by the way, because there are no handlebars and basically everything is disconnected, unconnected, loose, however we want to call it, that can mean only one thing. And that thing is that because I'm going to replace quite a lot of those cables now, and because I already had heard a lot of noise, you know that cracking noise when you hit some object, like so that is definitely coming from the bearings, because there's nothing else where it can come from. They are not very bad, actually. I polished them in the past because they were a bit rusty, and you can still see that even though they are shiny, they have some markups left from the past. There are even some sound at some part, but both are not as smooth as they used to be, so bye bye. And I'm going to change them with, yeah, you might think that this is a waste of money. Well, it might be, but based on my calculations, which are based on nothing, no evidence at all, at least I will know in the future whether it's worth it or not. This cost like 2 pair of bearings, and of course it won't be beneficial if not the integrated thing. You have to disconnect everything. It kind of adds a bit more work involved, and for that reason I think and would want to think that if they last at least 2 years, it's worth it. Will they? And will I have the bike for so long? We will see. I will also add a separate video about this, just to cover all the pros and cons. If you have to unconnect any of those, just make inspection of your bearings and make a decision whether it's time to do it. For me, it was a perfect time because I have bent rear shock cable. I have to change the shifting cable because it has scratches here and it's no longer smooth, and because the brake hose is too short a bit, in my opinion, I'm going to change it as well. And because I will be changing that rubber thing on the Swingarm connection, it's just a perfect match, so we will see. The next thing in the whole grand scheme of things could be a dropper. Honestly, this was my first bike with a dropper, and I didn't know how to properly service it. By servicing, I just thought that you unscrew that bolt, you clean everything down, you put the butter or just some grease, and it works. Well, it works until a certain time when it doesn't work completely. The reason why I had this misconception is simply because the dropper is 2 positions. It's basically a spring inside and it just pops up or goes down. However, apparently you have to full service it. In the Fox manuals it says in 120 hours of riding or yearly, whichever happens first. I rode quite a lot of it, made sure that it's properly lubed all the time. As it started to get not as smooth, I always made sure to clean everything down, and it was working perfectly until one time when it dropped down and it didn't work. I made a full service procedure in Fox. However, even though after the full service it's not ideal, even though it works, but it has some unnecessary sounds and the movement in all the angles is increased than before. So my suggestion would be to do the service at the intervals which is suggested, well, unless you don't use that much the dropper during your ride, so you can just skip it a bit less intervals. Trust me, it's not worth saving 50 euros yearly in order to figure out that maybe at some point you will have to completely change the dropper to new one. For that reason I bought 2023 model, and this one will go into my hardtail because once I got used to the dropper, I don't want to ride the bike without the dropper at all. Yeah, while the dropper weighs a bit, requires maintenance differently than casual seat post, it adds that fun factor which you don't want to miss. Unless you're riding on flat gravel roads, then maybe. But why did you bought the full suspension bike in the first place? Yeah, it surprises me as well how much I can talk about such fundamentally simple tool, which is the bike, but if you have what to say, you should say, right? One other thing which I haven't done as frequently as you should do is to service your rear shock. Even though I haven't serviced it as frequently as it would have to be done, I still did it once, so full service was done for this shock. Having a separate shock is kind of time-saving thing where you don't have to carry the whole bike, or for example, if something goes wrong, you don't have to put your bike for a week down and you can continue doing your plans. If something breaks down in the shock and for example the shop maybe don't have the spare parts, you are done. For that reason I just bought nude. Actually it's the same one as it was in the bike, with just the Kashima coating because there were no other options. By the way, have you noticed that it's very hard to find those shocks? Basically I found it in the distributor of the Baltics area and it was at least publicly not available to buy anywhere else. I don't know the reasons, but it was a strange one. You can have a look how professionally this shock was serviced. Actually, I was surprised by the whole process. And in case if you want to do the service of the shock on your own, well, unless you have equipment for that, don't. Why? No, this time I haven't tried it myself and I haven't messed things down. But after seeing the whole process, I understood why it costs, and at the same time that you should don't do it in your home place. We are moving towards the rear of the bike, so it's a good thing to know that we are in the right direction. In my channel you already can find how to service your bearings, a lot of videos about that. But one thing I want to significantly point out is preload washer. So it's not a washer, it's a nut. On the non-drive side there is a linkage and there is preload washer of this sort. So bear in mind that this has to be applied properly, and I will add a video about this, but it's very important this to be properly installed, simply because it can cause some noise from your suspension. And yeah, make sure that this one is properly installed and preload is done. You won't have that annoying noise which can happen. Make sure to figure out how this works, or if you don't want to, you can just check other videos to find out how it's actually made to work. You probably wonder why these are loose and there are no brake caliper. Why? Simply because I have to change the shifting shield because it has some cuts here and general shifting was not as smooth. In the past I tried to change it without removing this and it was very hard time to do it. So this time, because I removed things, I decided that, well, I will do it this way. Actually, this rubber thing, which kind of fits in that hole, was broken down a bit. You won't be able to see the issue here simply because I peeled off that part which was broken down. The reason why this has happened is probably because at some point I carelessly inserted it into that hole, and what has happened after washing, I noticed that there are some water inside. In order to prevent that, I will just change it. Whenever you are adding your swing arm, if you removed it, or most likely you will just loosen it out when replacing the bearings, make sure that that rubber fits in the hole perfectly, because otherwise you will mess things down and sooner or later you will have to replace it. So it's not a tragedy, but you can avoid it. About the swing arm, I can add a few things. Is that this part started to peel off, so I just checked what's inside, and behind there was very tiny piece of double-sided adhesive tape, so I added a bit more generous one here, and it holds now in place. But you can see that there are some pieces still left, but I haven't played with it too much. So yeah, from time to time probably you'll have to make sure that this sticks. In my channel you can also see how to apply the protective tape on the frame. I wasn't very happy how that protective tape did the job. If there are at least a tiny bit of air, you will get those. And you can see that these are kind of casual here. I can't blame it because I applied this protective tape after some usage, so it was maybe not that sticky. However, you can see that adding the protective tape could actually help your frame, because here it's no protection, here there is some protection. Actually, I put this bar down simply because it looked even worse than this one, so that's how it works. Here as well, if you don't add any protection, you will get that scratch at the bottom. Then applying the protective tape, whether a bike is new or already used, make sure that you have extra patience. And from that point, if you are patient, you have enough care, you'll be good to go. Maybe even a bit better than I did, but it was not that bad. And actually, the reason why it's good is because you can protect your stickers if you have any. So at least my name and surname has survived. Good job. About chainstay bearings, the left side, non-drive side, usually broken down and gets out of business faster than the drive side. I'm not exactly sure, but between those bearings there is a tube, and that tube can be either pushed between those bearings or can be a bit loose. Whenever it was a bit too loose, so now you can see that I can easily turn the bearings and they turn together with that tube. However, that tube is still a bit loose because you can hear that it kind of partially tight there. The reason why I pointed this out is that initially this was completely loose and it was knocking. That sound was like driving me crazy and I couldn't figure out where it's coming from, and eventually it was coming from this tube. Now when I changed those bearings myself, I made sure that it looks like exactly like now. However, one time I changed those bearings in the shop as well, and how they did it was that that tube was loose, and when it was loose it was knocking. Now I just pressed it like a few microns here and there and it's no longer loose and there will be no bouncing. If you like bouncing sound, you can leave it completely loose. I don't like bouncy sounds, so I made sure that bearings are completely not affected, so they are spinning like normally and there are no friction at all. However, that tube is exactly how it should be in my opinion, because otherwise it just bounces. So no sound, no issues. Oh, I just noticed how terrible my seat looks like. I have to remove this from the camera. And last but not least, the most tedious thing of the whole spark. Why? Simply because when the brake caliper sits here, you have no access to remove the brake pads. So I already said that, but in addition to this, if you take a look at the bolt, it's not straight. So whenever you insert any tool, which is Allen key, hex one, you always have it a bit angular. It's hard to showcase it, but it's a bit angular. And yeah, I've broken down one bolt already. XTR's bolts are, in my opinion, a joke. This type of solution, it's even more joke, but maybe it's just me, maybe I don't know how to do things. Possible. Changing the brake pads is, you don't want to do it, so in order not to change the brake pads, you have to go without brakes. Simple solution. And last but not least, if you have Raceface Next SL Cranks, which originally came with this bike, just YouTube what issues those cranks has. Fingers crossed that yours won't have that problem. Probably it's not gonna happen. So here we have it, insights about the Scott Spark RST Pro after riding on it for 1 year. Time frame is not that much important, because what's more important is what kilometers you ride and how much you ride. So I covered 7,000 kilometers plus on this bike. I've been at various places and you can check more videos in my channel from either just casual rides or what's even more common, races and analysis of the race. If you want to learn more about MTB and see the race analysis, just have a look in my channel and you'll find a lot more than you would want to watch. So that's it. Thanks for your time and I hope to see you around.
Let's get it.